This episode of Rhizome is brought to you in part by the Synthesis Security Group and Fuzzy Wuzzy Signal Processing, a venture of Ian Swanke. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a hidden side of samurai history that is literally going to change how you view Japan's legendary warrior class. We usually picture the samurai as this exclusive brotherhood of men fighting out on open plains, but the actual historical records from the Sengoku, or Warring States period, reveal a much more complex and honestly fascinating truth. We're going to explore the untold history of Japan's female warriors, the Onna-Musha.
So picture this. You're in the middle of a brutal 16th century siege. The skies are choked with smoke, the outer walls are crumbling, and the Lord's main army completely wiped out. The enemy is literally breaking through the final gates. So, who defends the keep? It's a crazy question, right? But the answer reveals a fierce, desperate line of defense that invading armies absolutely did not expect to face.
Okay, let's get into Section 1, the last stand of 1575, the Siege of Tsunyama Castle.
Right in the middle of this nightmare is Ueno Tsuruhime. She was the noble lady of Tsunyama Castle. The massive Morai clan was invading with overwhelming numbers, and honestly, defeat was 100% certain. But Tsuruhime didn't just cower or surrender. No way. She actually put on her husband's chest armor, grabbed her weapons, and stepped outside to lead a final countercharge. And get this, she didn't go alone. She led a vanguard of exactly 34 female attendants. Just 34. Try to wrap your head around the sheer guts that took. 34 armed women charging headfirst into a massive enemy force just to buy time and protect their honor. It's wild.
So, how did this all play out? Well, it's pretty tragic. After the Morai clan breached the castle, Tsuruhime and her 34 women launched their charge. And the enemy commander, General Kobayakawa Takakage, was actually so stunned by her bravery that he refused to let his men strike them down. Seeing that the enemy literally wouldn't fight them, and knowing the castle was lost, Tsuruhime and her loyal band retreated back to the keep. On June 4, 1575, they chose to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, so they could die on their own terms. And you know what? General Takakage even made sure she and her retainers received proper memorial rites later on. That's the kind of profound respect she commanded from her enemies.
Moving on to Section 2, separating fact from fiction, the two Ueno clans.
Now, history can get pretty messy, and we have to be super careful to keep our facts straight. It's actually really common for people to confuse our fierce 16th century Sengoku warrior from Bizen province with another figure from the 13th century known as the lay nun Ueno. Obviously, very different people. The 13th century Ueno was a deeply religious patron of Nichiren Buddhism over in Suruga province, literally as far from a battlefield as you can get. We've got to make sure we clearly separate the peaceful patron from our tragic defender to truly honor Tsuruhime's military legacy.
Which brings us to Section 3, three faces of female warriors, archetypes of the Onna-Musha.
If we zoom out from Tsuruhime for a second, the broader history completely blows up the myth that there was only one type of female warrior. We can actually group the Onna-Musha into three wildly different archetypes. We just talked about the siege martyr, right? Like Tsuruhime, making a desperate last stand. But then, compare her to someone like Tomo Gozen from the earlier Genpei War. Tomo was a vanguard champion. She wasn't hiding behind castle walls. She was out there in open cavalry charges, firing a heavy bow and personally decapitating top enemy commanders. And then you have Tachibana Ginchio from the late Sengoku period. She was a strategic leader, focused entirely on training troops, building fortifications, and acting as a powerful deterrent. And unlike the Martyrs, she actually survived the era.
Speaking of Ginchio, this fact is absolutely mind-blowing. In 1575, her father formally handed over leadership of the entire clan to her when she was just 7 years old. 7! It's a super rare instance of a female daimyo, and it proves something huge. Female authority wasn't always just some desperate emergency measure taken when all the men died. It could be a totally legitimate, legal, political position with immense feudal power. I mean, Ginchio held genuine command and even set up her own personal all-women's guard unit. How cool is that?
All right, Section 4, the formal role of Onna-Musha, beyond the battlefield. Here's the thing. These women fighting wasn't some kind of rebellion against the system. It was actually baked right into standard military doctrine. While the men were typically sent out for offensive field campaigns, the Onna-Musha formed the absolute defensive and administrative backbone of samurai domains. When the lord marched out, the women and elderly retainers stayed behind as the garrison. They ran the castle's supply lines, managed the armories, and used their training in math and literacy to keep the entire domain functioning. And ultimately, they were responsible for protecting the family lineage and honor. That meant being ready to defend the ramparts during a siege, or if things went completely south, performing Jigai, a formal method of ritual suicide involving cutting the jugular, just to avoid the dishonor of capture.
Let's dive into Section 5, Weapons of Samurai Women, the arsenal of the Buket class. To handle all these intense responsibilities, noble women of the samurai class had to undergo rigorous martial arts training, called Bujutsu, and they studied this just as seriously as classical literature or the tea ceremony. Their signature weapon? The Naginata. This was a massive polearm, about 6 to 8 feet long, with a curved blade on the end. The tactical advantage here is huge. It gave a female defender the reach and leverage to totally neutralize the sheer physical strength of a heavier armored male attacker. By using wide, sweeping cuts at the legs and thrusting under armor plates, a skilled Naginata fighter could keep dangerous attackers at a very safe and very fatal distance. Next up in their arsenal was the Kaiken, or Tanto. We're talking about a 6 to 10-inch double-edged dagger that was super easy to conceal inside a sleeve or a sash. If an enemy managed to breach the castle and fighting spilled into those tight, narrow corridors, this dagger was perfect for lethal, close-quarters defense, rapid strikes to the neck or exposed joints. But you know, it also had a really grim dual purpose. If the castle fell and all hope was lost, the Tanto was the exact tool used for Jigai, allowing a woman to protect her honor in her final moments. But the entire landscape of castle defense changed forever in 1543. That's when the Tanegashima or Matchlock rifle was introduced. Think about it. A firearm provides ranged, lethal power that instantly erases any physical strength gap between men and women. Training quickly shifted to aiming, reloading under pressure, and firing in coordinated volleys. Remember Tachibana Ginchio? She famously armed her maidservants with matchlocks to actively scare off incredibly powerful generals. It just shows how incredibly adaptable the Onna-Musha were to bleeding-edge military tech.
To really put this into perspective and show just how lethal this formal training was, we have to look at the story of the female warrior, Miorini. In 1586, she didn't just passively hide behind walls. No, she actively set up fortified positions, launched nighttime ambushes, and designed complex matchlock traps that successfully crushed a massive invasion by the formidable Shimazu clan. This wasn't some symbolic token defense. This was highly effective, ruthless military strategy, pulled off flawlessly by a woman in the middle of a chaotic civil war.
But despite this massive legacy of military power, everything shifted when Japan finally unified. During the bloodbath of the 16th century Sengoku period, survival meant absolute pragmatism. Women had to be lethal. But when the Tokugawa shogunate took over and kicked off the peaceful Edo period in 1603, the constant warfare abruptly ended. Neo-Confucian gender ideals took hold. The fierce martial training these women once used for war was gradually stripped of its battlefield purpose. Instead, it was repurposed into a way to cultivate inner poise, personal strength, and maternal discipline at home. And just like that, the real, lethal legacy of the Onna-Musha started fading into obscurity. Which brings us to our final thought for today. The dramatic shift from the chaotic Sengoku era to the peaceful Edo period shows us exactly how fast crucial historical roles can just be overwritten. If a couple of centuries of peace and changing social rules can almost entirely erase the fierce, undeniable history of the Onna-Musha, women who literally commanded castles, fired matchlocks, and led desperate charges, we have to ask, what other unsung martial histories are lying hidden behind the walls of peacetime? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and always keep questioning the history you've been taught.
Now available exclusively on Amazon Kindle eBooks, Rhizome Summer 2026, a collection of essays, Rhizome Fall 2026 Book 2.